Anne.
Hi, Emily.
So let's see. We are here this evening. I'm Emily Bazelon. I'm a senior editor at Slate.
And I'm Ann Althouse of the blog Althouse in the University of Wisconsin Law School.
And we are here to talk about three things. We're going to mostly talk about David Souter's retirement from the Supreme Court and all the endless speculation about who will replace him. Then Anne is going to gloat about a bet she made with me about the closing of Guantanamo and why she thinks she's winning. And then I'm going to plug Slate's new women's website called XX, which is launching next week.
Okay, cool.
So, Anne, I wanted to ask you what you thought about President Obama's remark, which he has made frequently, that he is looking for a Supreme Court justice with empathy. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, I think it exposes him to some political debate that really I don't think is actually quite fair, because I think that, I was looking at his quote today, what he actually said. I view that quality of empathy, of understanding and identifying people's hopes and struggles as an essential ingredient for arriving at just decisions and outcomes. So I think it's something that a lot of law professors, legal academics think, which is that legal reasoning has a component of emotion. I personally believe that. I think that human reasoning includes an emotional element, and that you can't get through a complex decision unless you're going with some emotional cues. So the emotional structure is part of the mind, and it's necessary to reason, whether people try to exclude it or not. So it's not just saying, I want judges who will do whatever they feel, who will sort of empathize and sympathize with people and decide outcomes that way. I think it's a recognition that emotion genuinely is part of reasoning, and therefore the soundness of a person's emotions and the tendencies of their emotions really are something that we ought to consider and shouldn't be excluded. But I think it gives a lot of fuel to Obama's enemies and to conservatives who want to take potshots at his nomination, that he puts it in those terms because it's so susceptible to being misunderstood.
That's interesting. So another thing that Obama has been talking about, these abstract statements that he makes, in some ways, to some degree, they feel like anybody could say them, they could apply to practically anyone he might choose. But one of the other remarks he made that struck me is this emphasis that he wants a justice who will think about how his or her rulings apply to people's everyday lives, to how safe they feel in the home and how welcome they feel in their nation. Did that strike you in any particular way?
I think that's the same point, which is that law isn't just an abstraction. It's not math. It's something that is related to the world, and that the whole substance of it is interconnected with the world. And our connection as minds to the world is done with emotion.
Do you think
and I think all of that fits together. I just don't think it's so extraordinary. I think it's just common sense.
And do you think it could apply really across the political spectrum to any justice? Would you say that a justice on the right, like Justice Scalia or Justice Thomas, also ascribes to these same principles and demonstrates them?
Well, I don't know if they openly embrace those principles. I think that they may take the position that emotion must be excluded and that they really are working from texts and that they're right answers that are embedded already in the language that they have to interpret. But I think that there is emotion behind the feeling that they need to do that. And I appreciate what they're doing, and I think excluding some sorts of passion really is part of the judicial role. But the idea that you can squeeze all emotion, all humanity out of what you're doing, I don't think you really can. And I think that if you think you can, maybe the emotion that you have really is a kind of coldness and selfishness, or an alliance with some interests that don't get named on Obama's list, the poor, the minorities, and so forth. You may have sympathies that lie somewhere else. So I just don't buy the denial of that, although I understand why people in the judicial role think that they should pose as if they do exclude those things. But I'm not buying it, and I don't think sensible people really do buy that. Do you?
No, I don't buy it either. I find it to be a great relief to have it kind of flushed out as part of the equation as opposed to pretending that it doesn't play a role, because I agree with you that it does. One thing I've been finding really interesting about this use of the word empathy is the way in which it relates to the pressure on Obama to choose a woman for this next position. And I think there is considerable pressure. So what do you think about that?
So it's this idea that women are the repositories of feeling, that men are doing the cool analysis and women are doing the feeling. I mean, I think that's ridiculous because I think that all human thinking has this component of emotion, whatever that emotion is, whether women's emotions are in some ways different from men's on the average. I think the people that tend to get in a position to qualify to be Supreme Court justices are not your run-of-the-mill men and women. So whatever bell curves there are with emotion for men and women, I don't think it has all that much to do with the kind of people we're considering for the Supreme Court, especially the kind of senior women who have done what they needed to do to get into a position to, at this point in history, be on the Supreme Court. I don't think that I just don't like the prejudice of, women are the ones who, we need some feelings, so put some women there, and then the men will do the serious work.
And in all fairness, the president, the president hasn't used that word in a gendered way at all. It's more, the kind of juxtaposition of these two. But I don't think there's nothing he said that demonstrates that he intended that word to apply to women in particular.
No, but it just happens that it's time to appoint a woman, everyone seems to think. How can there just be one woman on the court?
No, what do you think? Do you think that this appointment should go to a woman?
Well, I think it hurts Obama for it to be so obvious that he needs to appoint a woman. And I think it opens him up to a lot of political attacks, just like this empathy business does. But I actually do think he should appoint a woman. There's so many qualified people. There's so many people who could go on the court. Pick one of the women. There's only one woman on the court. Women are more than 50% of the population. Talk about underrepresentation. Women are grotesquely underrepresented on the court, although they're also underrepresented in the senior pool of highly qualified people. But I think that they're qualified women who have the kind of qualities that he's looking for, so he ought to pick one of the women. I think some of the other diversity considerations are less compelling.
In terms of picking a Hispanic or a black judge or an Asian judge, or did you have something else in mind?
Well, I mean, an issue that I have, as we were talking about before I got on the phone, was just that the religious groups represented on the court, it's actually quite startling if you look at if he were to pick a Catholic, and there's some talk of the Second Circuit Judge Sonia Sotomayor, who is, it seems, Catholic. If she were appointed, there would be 6 out of 9 Catholics on the court. And I think Catholics are something like 30. I wrote that down today. Let's see what was that percentage of Catholics are 22% of the population. So
overrepresented on the Supreme Court.
67% of the Supreme Court justices would be Catholic, while 22% of Americans are Catholic. And then of the other 3, 2 would be Jewish, and there would be only 1 Protestant on the court at that point.
I think that seems to you to matter. Why does that matter?
Well, I think if we're going to start talking about representation on the court, that we should talk about a lot of things. Now, some people, like the commenters on my blog, really hate to talk about anything in this category, but it seems to me if we're going to talk about some of it, let's talk about all of it. If we're really about diversity, what happened to the religious diversity on the court? Why is that so skewed toward Catholics? I mean, obviously there's some reasons having to do with the abortion issue and so forth. But don't you have a problem with that?
I find myself uncomfortable with the identity politics that are a part of this discussion. And I wrote something quickly on Friday just saying that I thought that I will say straight up, if Obama picked a white man, I would be disappointed. Now, I haven't totally thought through the religion part of it. But I do feel like, aside from that, my own feeling about that, given the gender and racial composition of the court, that he should have free reign. And I just think that this sort of pitting of one group against another, there's something unattractive about it. Now, you're right, the Catholics are overrepresented, but there are only 9 justices, and it seems to me sort of a coincidence that 5 of them happen to be Catholic. I wouldn't want to disqualify someone for being Catholic. That seems the wrong way to go to me.
Well, some people are trying to qualify a person for being male, for being white. You can't be a white male, and yet there are these, we've waited a long time for a liberal president to have an appointment. There are obviously a lot of extremely impressive people who apparently don't have a chance at all because of their sex.
Although it should be said that this is the first, presumably, of 2 or possibly 3 appointments that Obama might get to make, and so the identity politics, if he addresses them in the right way this time, he might not really face them the next time. That matters to me.
Well, he's going to be defined and characterized and critiqued for making a sort of too overtly diversity choice, or if the list is too limited. I think obviously he's going to get whoever he wants.
Right. I guess,
so
I
for the
also
Republicans, the whole deal is going to be to define Obama, to try to attack him or hurt him by whatever he does.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I also think about the identity politics, that perhaps this is one time in which talking about a woman makes more sense than it usually would to me, because, Sandra Day O'Connor left the court, was not replaced, because Ruth Bader Ginsburg has complained about being the only woman on the court, because in a couple of arguments this term, including the one about the strip search case, it seemed like the men on the court really didn't get it in this fundamental way. And then finally, because Hillary Clinton lost the election, and there's this sense, I think, from a lot of women that this is payback, right or wrong.
You think that, that may be? Well, what about Hillary Clinton as a nominee? You think there's any?
I think that it's time for her. She needs to be the Secretary of State. She has a really important job, and I, think she could do it's too early to say that she's a great Secretary of State, but it seems to me that she could be, and I'm not really interested in seeing her move over at this point.
Well, I think she can't possibly be the nominee because she will be shredded as a nominee. I don't think she's
I think a
qualified,
lot of people feel like
and I think that she will be trashed on her qualifications. Anything having to do with honesty and character, she'll be raked over the coals about that. And there's so much to do. Maybe she doesn't deserve it, but it will be done. I don't see why she would even submit to that.
Now, what about Judge Sotomayor, who you mentioned earlier, who's coming up on a lot of short lists? She's a judge on the Second Circuit. She is Hispanic. She was appointed by Bill Clinton.
She was appointed to the district court by George Bush, the second
That's
George
true,
Bush.
and elevated to the Second Circuit by Clinton.
Yeah. So I think that is really distinctive about her. I was sort of shocked by this Jeffrey Rosen piece in TNR that I think came out today. Mm-hmm. That was really going after her mainly on just the idea that she's not smart enough. And I think that for Democrats, to get into an argument, to have one of the minority categories used for a nomination, and then to bring on the attack that she's not smart enough. I mean, it's sort of like Clarence Thomas all over again. Affirmative action, and the person's not good enough, not smart enough. I'm sort of surprised to see that. I don't know how far that argument will go. And I don't know Sotomayor. I don't know anything about whether she's smart enough, but I was sort of taken aback to see that as the attack, that the minority candidate isn't smart enough.
It was also a bit undigested. I think Jeff said at the end of his piece that he hadn't really had time to read her opinions.
He interviewed former clerks. And even
quotes them anonymously.
Anonymously quoted, and who knows? I mean, I sort of feel like, that there's some stars that will be overlooked. If she just gets to the top of the list because she suits these categories, and then there are these brilliant stars. What are they? White men, presumably. But who are these former clerks? So what is their agenda? Who are they trying to promote? Who is Rosen trying to promote? I mean, I wondered about all of that. And, even when he quoted some people who supposedly were not so skeptical about Sotomayor, he had them quoted as saying things that she's a fine Second Circuit judge, maybe not the smartest ever, but how often are Supreme Court nominees the smartest ever? That was from the people who supposedly weren't skeptical about her. So his whole piece was just full of discussion of how she wasn't smart enough. I mean, what do you think of that? Well, we had a little bit of a technical problem there, but we didn't delete anything, so there's no censorship here. Just sparing you our little technical problem. But I think we had gotten through what we wanted to say about Sonia Sotomayor. And another one of the women judges who is often mentioned as a potential replacement for Justice Souter is Diane Wood. And you wrote an interesting piece in Slate today about that. So why don't we go to that point and tell us about your piece.
I'll tell you about my piece, and I'm curious about your thoughts. I was writing about a case that I found by accident when I started reading Judge Wood's opinions last night, and I should start by saying that the opinion was not written by Judge Wood. It was one that she joined onto. Mm-hmm. It's a 2004 ruling in a case involving a man with a very long criminal history of sex offenses, including some pretty brutal, awful crimes. And I guess brutal is the wrong word, but awful is not.
But he served his sentence and he was out. So why wasn't he? There was no thing of committing him afterwards.
No, this isn't about a civil commitment. He had served his sentence. He was on probation, and he went out and cruised a park near his house. Mm-hmm. He lived in Lafayette, Indiana, and he was seen out in this park watching some kids. And someone reported him to his probation officer, who told the chief of police, who knew all about his criminal history. And the chief of police spoke to the superintendent of schools in Lafayette and to the head of the Parks Department. And the schools and the parks decided to ban this man from the schools and parks in the city. He didn't challenge the decision about the schools, but he did want to go to the parks. And it wasn't just one small park. It was all the parks, including a baseball diamond and the pools in the town as well. And he brought a suit on First Amendment grounds, primarily, saying that he was being punished for his thoughts, essentially. And then there's also a substantive due process claim about how he was being denied a fundamental right to go to the park, essentially. Mm-hmm. So the district court judge who heard the case ruled for the city, said that the city was considering the health and welfare of its citizens, and that was legitimate. That was enough. The case came up on appeal. It was a 3-judge panel of the Seventh Circuit that Judge Wood was sitting on, along with another judge whose name has come up in the Supreme Court, who's who. Her name is Anne Williams. And Judge Wood and Judge Williams ruled for the sex offender, who's called John Doe, in the opinion, and against the city, saying that it was a violation of his First Amendment rights, that he was essentially being punished. Then the case went up for what's called en banc review, which is when the whole Seventh Circuit, all 11 judges, rehear the case because there's some controversy with the panel ruling. And in this case, in an 8-3 ruling, the Judge Williams panel opinion that Judge Wood had joined was reversed. And the 8 judges in the majority essentially said this really isn't a First Amendment case. It's really a case about the future dangerousness of this man. And he had testified very clearly in the course of litigation that, in fact, he had gone to the park looking for kids and had only not actually hurt kids because there was a group of them together and it was harder to do something to them when there were a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. It was pretty disturbing testimony. Mm-hmm. And then the other testimony from his psychologist was that she thought that he had learned to resist his urges, but not surprisingly couldn't guarantee he wasn't going to molest a child again. So this just seems to me, when I first read it, like this really interesting ruling that actually holds in tension a couple of the principles the president has put forward. On the one hand, he's talked about, as we were saying before, this idea of thinking about how rulings apply to people's lives. I can't imagine a lot of parents wouldn't look at this ruling and find it quite dismaying. But on the other hand, he has talked about protecting the rights of minorities against what can be a kind of tyrannical majority rule. And sex offenders are one of the most despised minorities of all. So you can argue that this is actually quite a brave decision.
Yeah, that's right.
I was wondering what you think.
Well, who is this empathy for? You can say empathy, but you can empathize with all kinds of different people. Obviously, it can be, I think that Obama puts it in the abstract as if you're going to empathize in the right way. And a lot of people, I think, are justly worried about too much empathy because, passions often go against unpopular groups and so on. And the court is supposed to stand by people's rights. And obviously, this man is in a despised group, and he's asserting basic rights. Whether those rights were correctly interpreted, I won't hazard a guess, but if those cases come up in public discussion about a nominee, I think it will not really be about whether the law was gotten exactly right, but more used to try to undercut somebody or disqualify somebody by making her seem too unconcerned about children,
Right. The problem is then all the subtleties and nuance tend to get lost. Anyway.
I mean, if we're going to fight these battles about empathy, it's going to be a free-for-all. And it's going to be done very politically. It's not going to have any kind of subtlety about what due process and free speech and so on really mean? It's going to be
But
a
Anne, do you think
free-for-all.
it could ever not be a free-for-all? I mean, it has been a free-for-all now for, 20 years, ever since Clarence Thomas. I just can't imagine it. I don't know if Obama could say anything in the world, and I think we would still have conservatives this time around ready to pounce.
Well, I mean, I hope he has the nerve to pick a strong liberal and an excellent judge, and that he doesn't wimp out and do something timid. I think that we got Souter and other, not to take anything away from Souter, but there's been a trend over the years, ever since Bork, to pick people like Souter who fly under the radar, who you can't really quite tell who they are, so they present as the neutral, good judge. And of course, once they're in the hearings, they always answer all the questions, basically saying, I'm going to be a good judge doing things in proper judgely ways. And we get nothing from that. And I think Obama has the power right now, because of the Senate and because of his recent election, to pick someone strong. And I think that we should have a strong liberal on the court. So I hope he does take that fire and doesn't just look for a neutral person. I don't think we've had a strong, forthright liberal in a long time.
Now, do you think that it matters what the professional background of the candidate is? Are you moved? I'm finding myself moved by these arguments that it might be a really good idea to find someone from the government or from, a practice of law, someone who is not simply steeped in the ways of the bench or perhaps the academy. What do you think about that?
I think it would be nice to have people who weren't purely judges. I think we have too many cool, neutral characters. I mean, I sort of like the idea of empathy. I'd like to see someone who went out and lived a different sort of a life, who has a different kind of a background. Whether that means someone who's been in politics, a governor or a senator or someone like that, I don't know that those people really have that much to offer, or if they would really be that good at it. But if they have the right qualifications, that would be nice. But I don't want someone completely out of the blue who isn't going to be really competent with the legal aspect of the job.
Right. I guess I keep just thinking I want someone super smart, just super smart. And there are a bunch of them out there, women more than included.
Well, smart, I know a lot of smart people, and I wouldn't try. These decisions that need to be made need someone with good sense and good grounding in the world. And some of the smartest people are complete fools when it comes to good judgment.
That's totally a good point. Well taken. All right, I'm not going to argue with that. But now I want to hear your why you think you're winning the Guantanamo.
Well, we made a bet a while back, and I'll put the link out in the sidebar.
I'm sure you will. I trust you to do that.
And I said I thought Obama would not close Guantanamo, and you took the bet.
Within a year, there's time running left on this bet, right?
There's lots of time. Well, two things happened in the last few days that I think show that I'm going to win. Number one, Obama said that that officials who work on the Guantanamo issues. This is a link from the New York Times. Officials who work on the Guantanamo issues say administration lawyers have become concerned that they would face significant obstacles trying some terrorism suspects in federal courts. Judges might make it difficult to prosecute detainees who were subjected to brutal treatment, or for prosecutors to use hearsay evidence gathered by intelligence agencies. So now there is a move to stick with the military commissions and to not bring these people into federal court, and that the military commission approach really was a good one. And I think that the Obama people are getting to realize that, and they're sort of admitting, the military commission approach is starting to look good now that we're really examining the alternative. So that happened, I think, on May 1st, and then today it came out that the money that Obama sought to begin relocating the people from Guantanamo, he sought $80 million. It got left out of the House Appropriations bill that just came out. The House version of the war spending bill didn't include these funds. So, I mean, I think that's, personally, I just don't believe that's just the House not putting it in. I think the whole thing is a sleight of hand to get Obama out of his executive order to close Guantanamo, and that, in fact, the House is helping him out, giving him the out, which is, we're not giving him the money to do it, so, can't do it. Said I would do it, but can't do it. They didn't give you the money. I think it's all a big setup, and Guantanamo will not be closed. So that's two things that have happened in the last few days. And I'm going to win.
Well, I'm not conceding because I have
gloat.
many months left to run on my side of the bet, but I will say that your side, moved ahead this week and mine did not.
Yeah. So if this is one of the things that's being traded on one of those things, I think.
I don't think we're important enough.
But if there is one of these things on whether Obama will actually close Guantanamo, that probably is one of the things people are trading.
That's definitely possible.
Yeah,
Not our bet, but the general principle, that's possible. The other quick thing I wanted to add was, this has been funny, was that it is true that the administration is thinking of returning to military commissions, but they were talking about beefing up the procedural protections for the detainees in those commissions. And then the question becomes, obviously, well, how many more procedural? What?
I'm sure they'll make a show of that, saying that their military commissions
are better. You can talk about that until you're blue in the face.
Yeah. I mean, they have to distinguish themselves from Bush. They made a show of doing it at first, but they're gradually creeping back to the position because it was actually a pretty good position. That Bush.
That part I'm not going to go for. But we'll see. All right, to be continued. We'll have to have like a quarterly check-in on it.
Okay.
This quarter, you're ahead this quarter.
Okay. But you have one more thing you want to talk about, which is
I wanted to talk about the launch of a new website that I am co-editing with my colleagues Hannah Rosen and Megan O'Rourke. It's called Double X. You can find it at doublex.com starting next week. Okay. And it is a women's website that we are hoping will continue a really fun, provocative conversation we've started on our women's blog at Slate, Double X Factor.
Could you just tell me a little about the whole idea? I mean, we were talking about feminism before, but what's the woman's website? Why isn't it for men, too? Why isn't it about relationships or something that's more inclusive of men? Why women?
Well, the way in which it's a women's website is that it's being edited and mostly written by women, but not entirely. There will be men writing for it. And there are plenty of men in our audience, too, actually. When we've done surveys of the readers of our blog, we found that a significant number of men, 40%, come in and sort of use it as a way to listen in on a conversation among women. But the idea was it's an experiment to see if the alchemy of a bunch of smart, I hope, women running a website and primarily producing the content create just like a slightly different sensibility and mixture of content from a place like Slate, which has lots of strong women's voices, but is not dominated by women by any means. And we're trying to harken back to the Esquire of the 1970s, which was just this home for really good writing and reporting and kind of fun voice writing without being a kind of like men's magazine in some fluffy way. So I don't know, does that help explain?
I actually used to read Esquire in the 70s. Before I went to law school, I had a job that consisted of reading magazines. I won't tell you why that was a job.
What were you doing?
It was a market research project that classified and counted the subject matter within different magazines, and it was used by advertisers. But my part of the job I was sort of an artist before I went to law school, and it was my day job. But I kind of liked it. I was reading all the magazines, so all of the magazines of the 70s I read every month. So I always read Esquire, and Esquire was quite good. Esquire still today is sort of what is their tagline? Something like basically it's teaching you how to be a man, and men need lessons, don't you?
But Esquire also still produces some really good pieces that could run in any general interest magazine. Yeah. So anyway, come check it out, doublex.com.
Okay.
Send us an email. Tell us what you think. We care a lot about building up a community of comments.
Well, I won't send you an email if I have something to say.
No, you don't have to send me an email. Our listeners, I want you to just tell me what you think the next time we're on Blogging Heads together.
Okay.
All right, well, this has been really fun. Oh, hey, you know what I've been meaning to send you an email about forever, speaking of emails, just to congratulate you on your engagement, which is totally exciting and wonderful.
Thank you. Did you see the New York Times article?
Yes, I did.
What did you think of that?
I thought it was great. I'm just excited for you.
It was kind of a little strange, but yeah,
I'm sure it's funny to see yourself in that. I thought you handled it well.
It's funny to see just like a couple of months of your life turned into sort of like a mythic narrative in which they choose the things that fit a story. It's strange. I mean, in some ways, you have to sort of back away from it and just see it as like a story inspired by whatever it was you said. But the parts are selected out, and you can't get too involved in it. But
yeah, so there's a longer discussion about the reporters as con artists and how no one's retelling of one's own story ever quite feels right.
Yeah, there's some people say you just should never talk to the reporters. But
yeah, well, I can't say that since I'm one of them.
Actually, but the Times reporter that I talked to, Jan Hoffman, I had great conversations. I really enjoyed it. I really appreciated what she did. And I know she's writing a type of article that really is written for women. It is kind of designed to be a counterweight to, all the bad news in the newspaper, all the heavy news, that there are some stories that really are there to make women feel good, to inspire people, and they're constructed around that idea. So it's a little less dangerous than some of the talking to reporters that's done, I found out. But
well, that's
I
true.
really
Although I'm
going to
question your premise. I heard from a lot of men who found that article inspiring.
Yeah?
I don't think that article is just for women.
Yeah, well, there's an idea that, even after many years, there could still be someone out there for you. And I'm actually interested in writing just about the subject of forming a relationship when you're rather old, and forming a relationship that's about not building your whole life together, but that's about moving into old age, really, and making a good life for yourself at the end of life, yeah.
You should totally write about that. I want to read that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. It's been so fun talking to you, as always.
Okay. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.